Hi, my name is Tom and welcome to my channel Integral Views. So it's quite common, isn't it, to hear people say that migration has always been part of British history, and so nothing that's happening now is anything unusual at all. This is just the way things have been for thousands of years. And we hear that online said quite often, yeah, as kind of a throwaway thing, you know, that makes this historical context as if this is just the way things are and it's just people on social media just complaining when they, you know, bring up the issue of migration. So I want this video to basically be one that debunks this idea thoroughly. So whenever you see this these kinds of things said online, or whenever in general conversations, you can send them this video, or you can pick certain parts out of it, some key statistics, and then you can just debunk that statement immediately on the spot. So what I'm saying here in this video is UK specific, but this will apply to a lot of Europe as well, right? One thing that I can say from the start is that this has never happened before. We have never seen the kinds of migration at the levels we're seeing it now, and not just in terms of raw numbers, but as a percentage of the total population. So we're seeing something that has never been seen before, at least in the last 2,000 years that we have, you know, reliable, to some extent reliable records for, right? But we can say that this has never happened before. And in this video, I'm going to go through and show why and the historical context from the Romans to the Normans, etc. And this video is really quite specific on that question, okay? So I'm going to keep it relatively short. I'm going to cover some important information in quick sort of bite-sized chunks. Look, if you find this video useful or entertaining or valuable in any way, I'd really appreciate it if you like the video and subscribe to my channel. It makes a huge difference. I'm quite a small channel still, so I'd really appreciate any support that I can get. Thank you so much. I just want to provide a quick example of some people expressing these kinds of views. So have a quick watch of this video here.
So what are your thoughts on the immigration in London? Like, people call it mass immigration.
Well, we don't.
You don't? Okay.
We
So
don't.
please, so correct that, please.
I don't know if I can. It's always happened.
Yeah.
You know, we are a nation of immigrants,
Yeah.
right from the Angles and Saxons.
Yeah.
And it's just, you know, I would welcome it.
Yeah.
I would welcome it.
There's a lot of like people saying like Islam is not compatible with the West.
Too bad.
Yeah. What do you think about that?
You just have to live together.
Yeah.
Suck it up. You know,
Yeah.
you rub shoulders.
Yeah.
You're together. You get along.
Yeah.
And they are just factually incorrect. So it is actually objectively incorrect what they're saying. It's not true. And so you've got to begs the question, how do they get into this state of mind where they believe this stuff that's not true? This misinformation, these faulty views, how do they end up in that place ideologically? I think a big part of it is they just like the butterflies in their stomach when they say things, yeah? It makes them feel good. They get this kind of warm glow feeling of, and what that's based on is this idea that everybody is the same, because it would be lovely, actually it'd be really boring, but you know, it's this thing where it's like everyone's the same, nobody's different, because there are some harsh truths to reality, aren't there? That people are different, cultures are different, some are better than others, okay, produce different results. That's kind of inconvenient, isn't it? So it's much nicer to just live in a fantasy land, and then you get these lovely butterflies whenever you say it. So it's like an affirmation. It's almost like they're making this affirmation, and it makes them feel great. And that's why they do it. So let's get straight into it, okay? Now, this chart here shows the historical context for foreign-born people as percentages within the United Kingdom, going all the way back to the year zero, the year naught, okay? So basically what we're looking at here is what you'd call a hockey stick graph. So 2,000 years of British history, and you can see that what's happening now is completely unique and has not happened before. We have never had this many foreign-born people in the country in a single time in our history, right the way back to the Roman times. So let's add in some key events that have happened. So we've got the Roman Empire in Britain, year 47 AD to 410 AD. And when they were here, right, they were 3.5%, so 3.5% foreign-born citizen people in the UK, lording it over, you know, people here. And then we had the Norman invasion, 1066. and that represented about 2% of the population, believe it or not. But today we've got a foreign-born population of around 20%. Let's go through those historical occurrences in just a little bit more detail. So you got Roman invasion, and don't worry, this is not a history lesson, this is very quick. 47 AD to 410 AD, as I've said, and actually they named the islands Britannia in that time period. So there are 125,000 Romans in Britannia at that time, during that time period. That's what we can kind of surmise, right? And there was like 40 to 50,000 Roman troops, right? Roman soldiers. And then the additional number is kind of like their families, and then people that would support the soldiers. So you're talking 125,000. That's against a population of between 3 and 3.6 million, and that gives you a percentage of around 3.5% of the population. Fast forward a quick 1,000 years and you end with the Norman invasion. So obviously the Normans coming over from France across the Channel and then invading Great Britain, right? So the Norman Conquest, 1066, brought a wave of settlers from Normandy and Brittany. However, the Normans remained only a tiny elite. We estimate at about 2%, so about 2% of the total population came over, and with the Normans that were kind of ruling over the rest of the people on this land in Britain. And some interesting context there. So we're saying 2% came over, 2% of the population relatively to the population at that time came over, right, and invaded and then took over the country and then built a bunch of castles and stuff, right, and did a lot of cool stuff actually. And by the way, my ancestry goes back to the Normans, well, half of it at least. And for context now, we import that same percentage, 2% of the total population as it is now, every about 12 to 15 months at current rates. So that's like a continuous, constant Norman invasion that's taking place. Of course, the people coming are very different to the Normans. One event that I want to talk about as well is the Great Famine in Ireland, and this occurred in 1845 to 1852. On our chart it looks like this. So if that was included, you can see the spike there, and that was 4.7% of the population. But this chart is actually foreign born, and because it's Great Britain and Ireland at the time, they don't count as foreign born. So although they're refugees coming over, and it was 1 million people who came over from Ireland in a population of 21 million total, 4.7%, they don't count as foreign born population. And the reason I bring this up is because the Great Famine in Ireland is often used as an example of this just being normal, that refugees come when they need to from history. And what I'm saying is, well, actually, technically, they were not foreign born, right? So it's different. And of course, they're right next to us. So just a completely different thing. And for the record, what a horrific thing the Great Famine was. I don't want to go into it. This isn't a history lesson, but you should learn about it if you don't know about it. It's really quite horrific. So what we can say at this point is this has never happened before. This is a unique, first ever thing that is happening in our 2,000-year history in Great Britain or UK, okay? So effectively this is new, this is a new thing. And that runs all the way from the Roman Empire through the Norman invasion, all the way to now, okay? Because it's a new thing, let's zoom in a little bit. Let's zoom in on the 20th century and up to present day, okay? So that's what this chart shows. So we started in the year 1900 with around 1.5% of the population being foreign born. I've marked on here commercial air travel because of course that's a big factor. People can travel around the world much more readily. It took a while for that to become sort of adopted to the degree that it is today, but it's a factor we need to keep in mind, yeah? So, but we of course had the World War. So World War II, I've just marked World War II here because we start to see some impact after that. So World War II, 1939 to 1945, and then I've also marked Tony Blair there, 1997, because he was someone who really implemented this kind of world-centric globalist stuff in our legislation and then opened the borders to the EU, and that's where things just really took off. But you can see that it's this gradual move, okay? So we need to understand why that happened. So at the end of World War II, we basically had the gradual or even quite fast dissolution of the sort of colonies, so the British Empire overall, okay? And so, independence was granted to many different countries. And we had this period after World War II, we were implementing all these human rights laws, all of these new institutions, the refugee conventions, all sorts of stuff like that. In 1948 to 1962, we had this time that it's referred to as the Golden Open Door. So it was this period of time where people from colonies of the British Empire, so India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, etc., Caribbean nations, and many African Commonwealth states, it's a period of time where they could move and basically live in the UK. And this was like an open door policy. There was no need to have any kind of restriction. So there were no restrictions, no visas, nothing like that. And that went on between 1948 and 1962. So we saw people coming into the UK deciding to move from these previous colonies. But after that time, after 1962, I won't go through it in detail, the door started basically closing, visa requirements, restrictions, etc. So there was this window basically where people could come to the UK, and many did. And so that's why we started to see this upward trend, right? So we started to see this upward trend in the percentage of foreign-born people after World War II. And just to cover it again really quick, so Tony Blair took office in 1997, did quite a lot of things, of course, as we all know. A lot of them I think need to be undone. But basically one of them was agreeing to open borders effectively with the EU. So we had unprecedented levels of migration coming from the European Union. And then people sort of saw what was happening over time and were not particularly impressed. We saw impacts on job vacancies, especially in, sort of more urban areas or in places that are on the coast, not in the major cities effectively, okay, in the north, etc. So basically once that happened, people were not happy, and then they voted to leave the EU as a result. After people voted to leave the EU, Boris Johnson took office, a Conservative Prime Minister, and then opened the floodgates not just to the EU, so he introduced this skilled visa system, and he opened the floodgates to the rest of the world in a way that had never been done before, the exact opposite of the intent for most people's votes when they voted for Brexit. I just want to look at a couple more charts that are from this Migration Statistics House of Commons library document that I thought were kind of informative, okay? Because we've looked at foreign-born people as a percentage of the UK, which I think is really an important statistic we need to be watching in future, but we haven't really looked at migration inflows and outflows, so let's have a look at that real quick. And I found this chart that goes all the way back to 1964. It's rare that you'll see this, but basically what this is showing is that we had a lot of emigration. I haven't touched on immigration. Actually, the UK, Great Britain, was largely a country where people emigrated to the United States, to Australia, to Canada, New Zealand, all over the world. So we saw for quite a significant amount of time, even after World War II, quite a lot of emigration, people leaving, and of course before World War II, right? So that was kind of a typical thing. And so that meant that our net migration was often negative, but it kind of bounced around neutral overall. But what we can really say and what we can see from this chart is that we have this inward migration, this immigration that is around 200,000 in total, not net migration, from 1964. And then it continues along until Tony Blair takes office. And that's when it really takes off. Yeah, so you can really see, and around 97 in this chart, that light blue immigration line is really taken off, and it's just been going up and up ever since. Has come down slightly recently, but only net migration really, because there's more people leaving, abandoning ship. The point really is here that this is a historically unprecedented event. This has never happened before, and it's already happened in the last couple of decades. This is a new thing. And this graphic just shows that shift. These are different censuses, and it starts in 1901 and it goes through to 2021, okay? So what this shows is it's going from the emigration where people are leaving and going to other interesting new places, and then we kind of shift to this neutral period, 1930s onward, And then when we get to Mr. Tony Blair, that's when we see in the censuses the spike in immigration. So net migration increasing, and actually it's been increasing ever since. It'll be really interesting to see what the 2031 census shows. But given that we've got this emigration rising again, with people basically leaving the UK because they're not happy, we're starting to see, that net migration come down, but still unprecedented levels of people coming to the UK every year. So that is the question definitively answered. This is not something that's normal. This is a unique phenomena that's never happened before in our more than 2,000 year history in Britain. This is the first time ever, okay? And the thing that occurs to me is that if you're going to do something that is a huge change, right, culturally, in a country that has had a very kind of stable scenario generally, then you better be damn sure that what you're doing has good results and results that you expect it to have. You better have looked at all evidence that you possibly can. You better have basically considered human psychology in groups, really thought deeply about it. And I don't think it was really cognitively well considered at all. I think that this was basically a feeling. I think it's an ideology. And I think generally it's kind of this mutated form of liberalism. See, originally liberalism was kind of confined to the borders of a nation state. It was rights that were offered, that were afforded to citizens of that country. And so you see that in the US Constitution, and that's the way it was originally intended. But then those rights started to be extended beyond the borders of the nation state, across the world in human rights law globally for everybody. And so people like Lord Hermer, Keir Starmer are human rights lawyers. And so they have basically created this scenario. Now, you can also refer to it as a kind of globalism, right, where it's kind of anti-borders. It's very anti-borders, anti-nation state. And so it's postmodern, there's relativism within it, and it's just basically a massive, monumental and complete shift and change relative to the 2,000 year history of Britain. So I'll say it one last time. You can go all the way back to the Roman Empire being in these lands, being in charge, okay? All the way through the Norman invasion, through the World Wars, all of that, 2,000 years of British history, and nothing like this has ever happened before. This is the first time. If you made it this far into the video, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you think this was valuable or useful in any way, I'd really appreciate it if you'd like the video and subscribe to my channel if you want to hear more from me. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, cheers.